will die. You will die slowly. Your stomach will swell. Your intestines will writhe and boil. Your eyes will burst. And some horrible stuff, possibly your brains, will start coming out through your nose.
So last year for spooky season, I did a series of videos on the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror series. A yearly tradition for many generation-wise is binging the Treehouse of Horror episodes until you reach the point in the series where you don't enjoy them anymore, which for me is around season 15 to 16, maybe more, who cares. Regardless, when Halloween starts, you better believe I'm gonna binge some Treehouse of Horror. There is no better place to start for my first Simpsons and Me to feature a straight-up individual review of a Halloween episode than where it all began with Treehouse of Horror 1. Treehouse of Horror is what I would consider a benchmark episode for the series, in more ways than one. Aside from being the first Halloween special, it was also the first appearance of Kang and Kodos, and it was the first episode scored by Alf Clausen, who would go on to score the series up until he was unceremoniously dumped in 2017. From what I can tell, based on commentary tracks and other sources of research, the inspiration for Treehouse of Horror 1, and by proxy the entire Treehouse of Horror series, were the EC comics such as Tales from the Crypt. Using that baseline, they decided to make some parodies of popular horror stories. I love this Marge walking through the red curtain bit where she gives the warning. It is like the most iconic image of this episode, and it actually does parody the word of warning from the 1931 Frankenstein movie, but it serves more of a purpose than that. It was actually thrown in because the producers were genuinely concerned that the episode might disturb younger viewers, which I don't see it, but when you're a kid, you can get startled by like the weirdest shit. Some kids can't even handle the slightest bit of spookiness. Of course, this episode is considerably tame compared to later installments of the Treehouse of Horror series. There is no real scene depicting anything violent. The only instance of blood in the episode is in the first entry, but I guess the atmosphere could trigger something in more sensitive younger viewers, so I'm not going to judge completely. Now, the opening title refers to it as the Simpsons Halloween Special, which I kind of went over this in my previous Treehouse of Horror video, but that was a year ago, so I'm just going to do it again. It's strange to me that it took them 13 years to actually use the term Treehouse of Horror in the official title card. The production title being a reference to the fact that Bart and Lisa tell scary stories in a treehouse. It makes sense that they would just use Halloween Special for future installments, however, because this is the only one that feature a treehouse as any sort of framing device. The production title, Treehouse of Horror, was merely a legacy title that carried on to subsequent Halloween episodes. And while we're here, I want to talk about how bad I miss the original Treehouse of Horror intros, the first 5. I really have wanted them to bring this back for years, just the classic Through the Storm Clouds intro. It's so fucking iconic. I'd take this over the overblown time wasters they call opening segments these days for Treehouse of Horror, like any day. Call this nostalgia, but every time I see the original Treehouse of Horror intro, I am taken back to 2001. I just got home from a hard day of school. It is the middle of a harsh Canadian winter. 9/11 has not happened yet. I'm tired. Dinner isn't going to be ready for like 2 hours, so I'm like, hey, throw on the 5 o'clock Simpsons rerun. And I throw it on, and I just see those storm clouds pull apart and that title card come through, and it would just give me this excited feeling inside. The syndication schedule had blessed me on those days, and I was watching a Simpsons Halloween Special in the middle of fucking February. I was gonna get to talk about it with my friends at school the next day. It was great. Now, you don't get those kind of surprises anymore. You just kind of throw on whatever episode whenever you want, but I do still get a little tinge of that excitement whenever I see this intro in particular. I guess it's just me remembering how much joy it would bring me as a child. Now, if only anything in my life today brought me anything resembling that kind of happiness, but anyway. I gotta say, the image of Bart and Lisa in the treehouse is probably like top 10 in the most iconic images of this show. It's nice to see them acting like kids act. Slowly, season 2 is actually starting to go up in stock for me based on moments like this. I find it rather funny to see Homer acting dastardly as a grown-ass man, trick-or-treating before he starts eavesdropping on Bart and Lisa as they start exchanging the ghost stories. The first 4 Treehouse of Horror episodes had these kind of wraparound segments, and It feels like something was lost when they dropped them completely. I don't know why. Like, no, don't get me wrong, the episodes that don't have them are still good, but there's just something about these little segments that just made it a little bit more cohesive, made it flow better. Like, I'm gonna talk more about wraparound segments as I do the episodes, but at least this whole element of the Treehouse of Horror series got a closure sequence in part 5, which again I'll talk about later when I get to part 5. The first story in this collective trilogy is titled Bad Dream House. It's sort of an amalgamated parody of several haunted house films, but it mostly draws from Poltergeist and Amityville Horror. It's the first ever Halloween segment, and honestly, it's pretty good. Certainly a strong one to start on. The haunted house shit is well done, it respectfully parodies the movies and the type of movie that it's based on, and it has some relatively funny moments to boot. Basic premise, the Simpsons move into a huge house that they got for dirt cheap, and the house is haunted or possessed or something. I specifically like the part where the house lifts Homer up to the ceiling. His scream is just perfect. The story comes to a head when the house incites the Simpsons family to try and kill one another. Of course, Marge gets everybody to come to their senses, being the voice of reason that she is, and there's an argument with the house.
Shut up! Quit trying to push us around! Stop saying those horrible things and show some manners!
Eventually, the conclusion is made that they'll just have to live with one another, at which point the house commits suicide. A pretty high note to start on for what would become a great tradition for years to come. The art style and the angles and the coloring they use in this segment lend themselves well to the theme of the story. Alf Clausen's score is also a very high point, with the main theme sounding similar to bits of score from Friday the 13th Part 7's score and Phantasm's main theme. I can see some similarities, but honestly it just kind of sounds like your typical late 80s horror score. I've learned to appreciate this segment more as I got older and actually watched the movies, you know, that it was based on, and quite frankly, it's certainly one of the stronger points of the first Treehouse of Horror. One scene that was always interesting to me was the Indian burial ground scene, because that shit gets cut out of syndication so fucking frequently. I don't even think I saw it until I owned season 2 on DVD.
You didn't tell me it was built on an Indian burial ground! No, you didn't! Well, that's not my recollection. Yeah, well, all right, goodbye. He says he mentioned it 5 or 6 times.
I'm guessing it was cut for time or something. Like, some episodes cut whole sequences out for time in syndication. It's weird, but it's weird that they would cut this out because it's such an important part of the story. I don't know. Regardless, Bad Dream House started the tradition in the strongest way it possibly could, being a season 2 episode. It captures the spirit of haunted house movies well, but it doesn't lose itself to the horror theme. It remains funny all the way through, but on the contrary, it doesn't let the humor take away from the spookiness. I would have to rank this one a solid 7 out of 10. Following Bad Dream House, Bart decides to one-up it with a good old-fashioned Twilight Zone parody, the first of many from classic Treehouse of Horror. Hungry Are the Damned is a parody of To Serve Man, a classic and very well-regarded Twilight Zone episode. The barbecue scene is one that stuck with me. I remember watching my dad do the barbecue and wanting him to do the thing that Homer did with the fuel, which he wouldn't do. I absolutely love this dolly zoom effect they put on Lisa, and the whole abduction scene is very well drawn and colored. Points for the ship needing 2 tractor beams to get Homer's fat ass aboard. Once the family is aboard the ship, we get our first official appearance of Kang and Kodos, who would become a staple of the Simpsons Halloween Specials for years to come. We also meet the third alien, Sarek the Preparer, who is voiced by James Earl Jones, which I actually recently learned via the commentary track that Jones was chewing on cookies for the entire time to get the drooling sound in his voice. He is a true acting professional and will go to great lengths to give the best performance that he can. Each alien is named after a Star Trek the Original Series character, and I love that detail, but from here the premise kind of drifts. It isn't bad, but it doesn't have anywhere to go from here. The Simpsons get shown the entertainment on board, which includes thousands of channels from across the universe.
You get HBO?
No, that would cost extra.
A Pong video game, and then copious amounts of food, which leads to Lisa becoming suspicious of the constant feeding. She investigates further and finds a cookbook, and they do this gag, which is pretty funny with the book, and it turns out that Lisa's suspicions are all the source of our foul human nature. Fun fact, originally it was to be revealed at the very last minute that the aliens were in fact planning on eating the Simpsons when it would show the book saying how to cook for 40 humans and eat them, which would have been a good twist, especially if it wasn't revealed until after the Simpsons get booted off the ship. This one's okay, but it doesn't break down any barriers of quality. It has the one cool animation moment and the debut of 2 iconic characters and a good guest star, one whose true performance for the episode is in the next segment. That's pretty much all this segment has. has, although I must say it is funny how both stories end with The Simpsons being completely rejected by someone. Rejection over how dysfunctional The Simpsons were was a theme at one point in time that slowly got shedded off by the series. But again, this segment isn't anything special. There's no real belly laugh moments. It's easily the weakest one out of the three, and I'd have to rate it a 4 out of 10. Slightly below average, but still enjoyable. For the third and final story, Lisa finally gets to tell one, and she retells Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. Not a whole lot I have to say about it. Others have already said much better things about this segment than I have. James Earl Jones reading Edgar Allan Poe. What's not to like? It's not particularly funny, nor is it scary, although the hallway shot is morbidly beautiful, and Bart as the Raven is kind of worth a cheap laugh, but this segment really just coasts on the fact that it's a classic poem read by a prestigious actor and animated nicely. I think it's neat, but it's nothing major. I don't really quote it or reference it or even have any single moment from the segment cross my mind besides what I've already mentioned, but it looks pretty. Poe's a legendary writer and a pioneer of the macabre, so it pays respect to both the source material and the many other works of Edgar Allan Poe. But it feels like this should have been the middle segment, and Hungry Are the Damned should have been a bit more. The segment serves as a cooldown segment, clearly, but Hungry Are the Damned didn't really get me hyped up enough to need a breather. That being said, it's an ambitious and almost pretentious in the best way project, and it's iconic in its own way. Based on the merits I mentioned, I could easily rate this a 6 out of 10. It's above average and ambitious. The episode's wraparound stories end with Bart and Lisa realizing that none of the stories they told each other had any sort of effect. I like Bart's line about horror in general.
Oh yeah, like when you look at Friday the 13th Part 1. It's pretty tame by today's standards.
And honestly, that's so true. As time goes on, things that were once scary, like The Exorcist, no longer have that same effect on people, and that's ironically where Treehouse of Horror 1 is at. Even compared to its sequel, it's very tame, both in imagery and subject matter, but it is a groundbreaker for the series' progression, and for that I appreciate it as a whole. I actually do like the conclusion of the episode. Bart and Lisa go back inside from telling their stories, yet Homer is shook. I'm not sure if the joke is Homer's a scaredy cat, or if it's a punchline to the dialogue about how generations build up a tolerance to older horror. I don't know, but the episode closes with Homer being afraid to go to bed while Marge reassures him that they're just children's stories. And when the lights go off, we get a little roundup of all the stories we heard, which I gotta say is a cool moment, really underappreciated in the grand scheme of things. The Raven landing, the reference to Bad Dream House, then the Kang and Kodos jingle playing.
Oh, I hate Halloween.
This is high art in terms of Simpsons Halloween moments, but, you know, I love this. If I was to rate the entire episode as a whole, it's slightly above average altogether. I'd give it a solid 6 out of 10. High average, ambitious, it's entertaining, but watching it only makes me want to go deeper into the Treehouse of Horror series. The first Treehouse of Horror is one of the most important episodes of The Simpsons, and while it pales in comparison to its follow-ups, it is still worth a watch. The Halloween season Treehouse of Horror binge just does not seem complete without watching where it all started. It's a good warm-up, and honestly, if I had like a kid, this, as well as its follow-ups, would probably be the go-to for entry-level horror, because the Simpsons Halloween episodes are what got me into horror as an adult. Even though this episode is weaker, it is not without its charm. Also, I'd like to take this time to note that for years, the number of Halloween episodes was always one behind the number of seasons. I had gotten used to that, but now 20th Century Studios is fucking it all up because they're doing 2 Halloween episodes this year. Tell me you're creatively bankrupt without telling me you're creatively bankrupt. First one is an episode-length parody of It, which, geez guys, it's been 5 years since It Chapter 1, you're a bit late to the party. And the second one, I think, is a more straightforward Treehouse of Horror, but why? Anyway, spooky season has just begun, and you better believe I have some good horror shit planned for this season. But until we meet again, yeah, I couldn't think of a closer. Bye.
Look, I know that to you, we Simpsons are a lower order of life. We face that prejudice every day of our lives. But we are happy on our little planet. We throw ourselves on your mercy. Please return us to...
Dinner time! Hey!